It was the winter of 1,874 inches, the Montana Territory, and the world beyond, Luke Marston's cabin, was a blank canvas of white. Snow, thick and relentless, fell in heavy curtains, burying the land under its icy grip. Inside the cabin, the fire in the hearth flickered weakly, the only source of warmth in the small, cramped space. Luke sat slumped in a worn wooden rocker, his arms wrapped tightly around his infant daughter, Rosie, trying desperately to soothe her cries. Rosie's cries had been constant for days now, sharp and painful, echoing through the cabin. Luke couldn't even remember the last time she had been quiet, when her small body had been at peace. The baby's face was flushed with hunger, her little fists clenched in desperation. The pain in Luke's chest grew heavier with every cry, a reminder of how utterly helpless he was. His wife, Ellie, had passed away, giving birth to Rosie. He had lost the one person who could have helped him through this. Luke had tried everything. He had ridden from ranch to ranch, his horse's hooves sinking deep into the snow as he begged for help. He asked each rancher if they had any women still nursing, anyone who could feed a child not their own. But each time, he was met with the same sorrowful look, the same shaking heads. "Sorry, Luke, ain't nobody got milk this time of year." His throat tightened with every rejection, every person who couldn't give him what he needed most. His own daughter, starving. His heart, once full of hope, now felt hollow. Ellie had left him with nothing but a promise. "Take care of her," she had whispered in the moments before she passed. But how could he? How could he care for a baby when he had nothing to offer her? The wind howled outside, but the cabin seemed even colder. Luke had long given up on the fire, his body numb from the harsh winter and his grief. Rosie's cries echoed louder, shaking him from his thoughts. With every tear, with every wail, the weight of his failure grew heavier. He cradled her tighter, whispering his apologies, as if the rhythm of his voice could fill the emptiness she felt. But deep down, he knew he was running out of time. His supplies were running low, his strength dwindling, and he didn't know how much longer he could keep going. Just as he began to surrender to the cold grip of hopelessness, the sound of 3 sharp knocks on the door broke the silence. Luke's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? The storm outside was unforgiving. Could it be someone from the ranches he had visited, or was it just the wind playing tricks on him? He rose slowly, his muscles stiff from sitting for so long. Holding Rosie close to his chest, he reached for his rifle. His mind raced as he stepped toward the door. He wasn't expecting company, but something inside him told him that this moment might change everything. A knock at the door. The wind had been relentless, battering the walls of the cabin. But when the knocks came 3 short, sharp raps, it was a sound that stopped Luke's heart. His hand tightened on the rifle as he hesitated at the door. He had already lost so much. What more could the world take from him? With one last glance at Rosie, he opened the door just a crack. What he saw stunned him. A woman stood in the doorway, soaked from the snow, her clothes torn and ragged, her face pale with exhaustion. Her lips were bluish from the cold, her skin drawn tight over her bones. But it wasn't the chill in her body that struck Luke. It was the desperation in her eyes. Something in her gaze made him step back, and she crossed the threshold without a word. Luke, still holding Rosie tightly, was silent for a long moment, studying her. She was clearly starving, her body trembling with weakness. But her eyes, they held something deeper than hunger. They held a kind of fierce determination, a silent plea for help. She stepped inside, her movements slow but purposeful, as if the journey here had been too much for her to bear. "I have milk," she whispered, her voice thin and cracked from the cold. "I have nowhere else to go." Luke stood frozen, not knowing how to respond. Milk? In the midst of this frozen wilderness? It was a gift, a lifeline. He didn't know who this woman was or why she was here, but the need in her voice made him step aside and gesture for her to come in. She didn't hesitate. Her trembling hands clutched her belly as if the weight of the world rested there, and for a moment, Luke couldn't look away. The storm outside raged, but inside, something else had begun. It was a kind of raw, quiet connection between two souls, bound by grief, by desperation, by the will to survive. Without another word, the woman made her way to the cot, where Rosie had fallen silent, her tiny face contorted with hunger. As if knowing exactly what to do, the woman carefully placed Rosie in her arms, her hands gentle, practiced. Luke stood there, his throat tight, as he watched his daughter's cries soften. For the first time in days, Rosie's tiny body relaxed. The frantic hunger in her cries was replaced by the soft sound of sucking. Luke's heart swelled in his chest. It wasn't just that his daughter had found relief. It was the simple, profound act of kindness, the kind of help he had never expected. And it came from a stranger. "Thank you," Luke whispered, his voice breaking as he watched the woman cradle Rosie. She didn't say anything in return, but the quiet understanding between them was enough. For the first time in days, the world outside felt a little less cold. A mother's touch. Luke stayed still, not sure if he should speak, if he should ask questions. Instead, he simply watched as the woman continued to feed Rosie. It was a tender, intimate moment, one that made the room feel warmer, despite the cold that still raged outside. The wind howled against the cabin, but inside, there was peace. As the minutes stretched on, Luke felt the weight of his grief lift ever so slightly. It wasn't just the relief that Rosie was finally getting nourishment. It was the realization that this woman, a stranger, had come to his door, offering him exactly what he needed: milk, hope, a chance to survive. The woman didn't seem to be in any rush. Her eyes were closed, her face soft, as if she had found some small solace in this quiet moment. But Luke couldn't help but wonder, who was she? Why had she come here, in the middle of a snowstorm, with nothing but the clothes on her back and milk to offer? As if sensing his curiosity, she shifted slightly, glancing up at Luke with tired eyes. She didn't speak at first, but her gaze was steady. Luke could see the exhaustion in her features, but there was something else too, a strength that hadn't been worn down by the world yet. "What's your name?" Luke asked, his voice soft. "Mariah," she replied simply, her voice hoarse but firm. She didn't offer any more than that, and Luke didn't press her. She had given him more than he could have ever asked for. Milk for Rosie, yes, but also an unspoken understanding. She didn't have to say anything more. For the next few hours, they sat in silence, the only sounds in the cabin being the crackling fire and the soft suckling of Rosie. Luke's mind wandered, but there was a calmness to it now. He wasn't alone. For the first time in days, he felt like he could breathe again. Mariah had come into their lives at the moment they needed her most. She had walked into the cabin without fanfare, without explanation, and had given them the one thing Luke couldn't give his daughter. It wasn't just a kindness, it was a lifeline. But as the night wore on, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this woman's story. And when he turned to look at her again, he saw something in her eyes. Something haunted. Something he didn't yet understand. But that, too, was a story that would unfold in its own time. The silence between strangers. As the hours passed, the storm outside showed no signs of letting up. The wind continued to lash at the cabin, its mournful howls echoing against the walls. Inside, the fire flickered and crackled, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. The only sounds now were the steady crackle of the fire, the rhythmic suckling of Rosie, and the occasional shift of Mariah as she cradled the child. Luke sat across the room, his hands clasped in his lap, unsure of what to do next. The silence between him and Mariah was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was a silence born from shared grief, from the understanding that words weren't always necessary. Neither of them asked about the other's past. Neither of them spoke of what had brought them to this cabin, to this moment. There was no need. Their silence was a bond in itself. Luke couldn't help but watch her as she gently rocked Rosie, her eyes soft with care, though there was a deep sadness hidden behind them. It was as if, in the quiet of the cabin, they both shared something deeper than words could express. Luke had lost his wife and was struggling to keep his daughter alive. Mariah had lost a child to violence, and now, here she was offering what little she had left to help another mother's child. Every time Mariah glanced up, Luke saw the same haunted look in her eyes. He didn't ask about it, not yet, but he could feel it, the weight of a painful past, one she wasn't ready to share. He respected that. He understood it. He too had burdens he didn't need to explain. He stood slowly and walked to the small table in the corner of the cabin. He grabbed a tin cup and poured some water from a nearby jug, offering it silently to Mariah. She glanced up at him, surprised at the gesture, but her tired hands took the cup. She didn't speak, just drank deeply, her gaze momentarily meeting his as she lowered the cup. "Thank you," she whispered. Luke nodded. "You don't need to thank me. You've done more than enough already." They sat in that silence for what felt like hours, each lost in their own thoughts. Luke's gaze drifted to the window, where the snow continued to pile higher and higher. The storm had become a storm of their lives. The hardships that had led them here, to this cabin, were not easy to overcome, but Luke knew, deep in his heart, that they couldn't stay silent forever. Something had to change. Mariah's presence, though quiet and still, brought a certain warmth to the room. In her silence, she seemed to understand the weight of the world they both carried. She didn't ask for anything in return for her kindness. She simply gave. It was a gift that Luke hadn't expected, but he would not take for granted. The hours dragged on, but in the peace of their shared silence, Luke found himself feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe it was the calm after the storm, or maybe it was the presence of another soul in this lonely cabin. Either way, the quiet gave him space to breathe again, to think, to believe that maybe, just maybe, life could start anew. Unspoken pain. The morning light crept through the cracks in the window shutters, spilling soft golden rays onto the worn wood of the cabin floor. Luke awoke to the sound of Rosie stirring in Mariah's arms. The baby's cries, though quieter than before, still tugged at his heart. He rose slowly, wincing as he stretched his stiff muscles. His body still ached from the days of riding from ranch to ranch, from the isolation, from the grief that weighed him down like a heavy cloak. Mariah was sitting in the chair by the fire, her eyes distant, her hands gently rocking Rosie back to sleep. Luke noticed the tremor in her hands, the way her body sagged with exhaustion. It had been days since she arrived, and though she hadn't asked for anything, he could see she was weary, physically, emotionally, perhaps even spiritually. He moved quietly across the room, not wanting to disturb the fragile peace that had settled over them. But as he neared her, his gaze falling on the weary lines of her face, he couldn't hold back the question that had been building in his mind. "Where's your baby, Mariah?" His voice was soft but insistent. "You said you had milk, but where's your child?" Mariah froze, her fingers faltering on the edge of the blanket. She didn't look at him at first. Instead, her eyes stared into the fire, her face unreadable. The silence between them stretched, thick with the weight of her unspoken story. Luke knew better than to press her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she needed to share, something that had brought her here, to his doorstep, in the middle of a brutal winter. Finally, Mariah spoke, her voice barely a whisper, hoarse from exhaustion and grief. "I lost him," she said simply. "3 weeks ago." Luke's heart skipped a beat. The way she said it so quietly, so matter-of-factly, told him everything. She hadn't just lost a child. She had lost something much more precious. She had lost a part of herself. He wasn't sick, she continued, her eyes still fixed on the fire. He was perfect, healthy, but my husband, he didn't want him. Her voice cracked slightly, the weight of her words sinking in. He said the baby wasn't his, that he had my mouth but not my eyes. He said I was unfaithful, but he wasn't. I loved him. I loved my boy. Luke's throat tightened as he listened, the weight of her story settling heavily on his chest. What happened? He asked, his voice barely audible. Mariah paused, her eyes squeezed shut. He broke his neck, just like that. He said it was the only way to make me pay. Her hands trembled as she gripped Rosie tighter, as if she needed something to hold on to, something to keep her grounded. Luke felt sick to his stomach. The pain in Mariah's voice, the unbearable grief that weighed her down, it was more than just loss. It was a kind of violence, a deep wound that could never fully heal. She had fled, escaping a nightmare she couldn't escape from. And now, here she was, offering what little she had left to a stranger's child. The room felt colder, despite the fire burning in the hearth. Luke didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to fix what had been broken. He could feel the rawness of her pain, the weight of her trauma, and it hurt him in ways he couldn't understand. But in that silence, there was something else too. Mariah wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She had come to him not for help, but for refuge, a moment of peace in a world that had been nothing but cruel. Luke's heart swelled with a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. The grief that had tied him to his wife, the pain of losing Ellie, was still there, but it wasn't the only thing that defined him anymore. He had Rosie. He had this woman, Mariah, who had become a part of their story, whether she knew it or not. "I'm sorry, Mariah," he said, his voice low, filled with a compassion he hadn't realized he had. "You don't have to say it again. Not here. Not ever." She didn't reply, but he could see her shoulders relax just a little. Her breathing slowed, and for the first time since she had arrived, she didn't look so burdened. Luke didn't know how to fix her pain, but he would stand by her. He would be the one to help carry it. Bonding through pain. The days passed slowly, with the world outside the cabin still blanketed by snow. The storm had subsided, but the weight of everything that had happened in such a short time still hung heavily in the air. Luke and Mariah moved around the cabin together, their actions sinking in a way that felt natural, even though they were still strangers. There were no grand gestures, no long conversations about the pain they had both suffered. Instead, it was the quiet acts, the shared glances, the exchanged gestures of kindness that spoke volumes. Luke noticed how gently Mariah held Rosie, how her hands seemed to cradle the baby with a kind of reverence. It wasn't just that she was feeding her. It was the tenderness, the instinctive care. Mariah wasn't just providing sustenance, she was giving Rosie a warmth that Luke hadn't been able to provide on his own. It was a tenderness that Luke couldn't help but admire, even as it brought a wave of sadness over him. The quiet grief in Mariah's eyes was a mirror of his own. He had learned over the past few days that the road to healing wasn't paved with grand actions or even spoken words. It was in the way they shared the small things. The way Mariah had accepted his offer of food with no expectation, just a simple nod of gratitude. The way she had taken Rosie into her arms, allowing the child to latch without hesitation. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was building something new. And Luke couldn't deny that a part of him began to hope, to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild together. One morning, when the sun finally pierced through the thick clouds and bathed the cabin in a soft golden light, Luke went out to check the firewood supply. It had been a quiet morning. Rosie had slept soundly, and Mariah had sat by the hearth, her face drawn and quiet, lost in her thoughts. Luke didn't press her. He knew she needed time, just as he did. But when he returned, he saw something that took him by surprise. Mariah was standing at the small, crude wooden table, carefully cutting up potatoes and salt pork, the only food they had left. There was something serene about the way she worked, a focus in her movements that Luke had never seen before. She didn't look up when he entered, but she spoke, her voice low but steady. "I can't just sit here," she said, more to herself than to him. "I can't just take from you and not give anything in return." Luke watched her for a moment, a lump rising in his throat. There was something in her that reminded him of Ellie, her quiet strength, the way she didn't ask for anything but still gave so much. Luke wasn't sure how to respond, but he could feel the bond between them growing stronger. It wasn't about gratitude or pity. It was about survival, about finding a way forward together. "Thank you," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "You don't have to do this. You've already done more than enough." But Mariah only shook her head. "We've both lost so much," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "But we're still here. We still have each other. And I have to believe that means something." Her words hung in the air between them, and Luke felt a warmth spread through his chest. She was right. They were still here. And as long as they were, there was a chance for something better, something more, the shadow of the past. Despite the growing warmth between them, the past was never far away. Luke knew that. It lingered like a shadow, just out of reach, but always present. Mariah's silence spoke volumes, but it was a silence Luke understood. He didn't ask about the man who had caused her so much pain, the man who had taken her child, the man who had driven her to run. But there were moments, in the dead of night, when the silence became too heavy to bear. The way Mariah would wake suddenly, sitting upright in bed, her eyes wide with fear. The way she would glance toward the door when the wind howled outside, her face pale and tense, as if waiting for something or someone to come for her. One evening, as the wind picked up again, rattling the window panes, Luke noticed Mariah standing at the window, her hands pressed against the glass. Her back was straight, but there was something in the way she held herself, something defensive. Luke had never been good with words, but he knew that in this moment, words weren't enough. He moved slowly toward her, trying not to startle her. "Mariah," he said gently, his voice low. "It's just the wind." But she didn't turn to face him. Instead, she stared out into the darkness, her breath shallow. "I'm not afraid of the wind," she whispered, her voice tight with something he couldn't name. "I'm afraid of the things I left behind, of the things that never really go away." Luke took a step closer, his heart aching for her. He didn't know what it was like to lose a child, to suffer the kind of cruelty she had endured, but he knew what it was like to feel haunted. "Whatever it is," he said softly, "you don't have to face it alone anymore. I'm here." She turned then, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time in days, there was a flicker of something in her gaze. Not hope, not quite yet, but maybe something close to it. Trust. Maybe that was enough for now. The showdown, the next day, brought a sense of unease. Luke couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The air outside had grown still, and even the animals on the ranch seemed on edge. The tension between him and Mariah had shifted slightly, but there was an undercurrent of something more, something darker. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it in his bones. By mid-afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon. The figure, distant at first, grew closer with each passing minute. Luke stood by the barn, watching, his heart pounding. The man rode hard, his horse kicking up a trail of snow behind him. Luke recognized the man the moment he came into view. It was Cyrus, the same man who had come looking for Mariah days earlier. But this time, he wasn't alone. Two more men rode in behind him, all three armed and looking like they meant business. Luke's gut clenched. He had a bad feeling about this. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle he kept by the door, but something inside him told him he didn't need it. Cyrus stopped at the gate, his face twisted in a sneer as he dismounted. "You're Luke Marston," he said, his voice low and cold. Luke didn't answer. Instead, he squared his shoulders and stepped forward, planting himself firmly between Cyrus and the cabin. "I'm looking for a woman," Cyrus said, his voice casual, as though this was a normal conversation. "She's about 24, young, brown hair, maybe with an infant. I think you know where she is." Luke didn't flinch. "I don't know who you're talking about," he said, his voice even. Cyrus's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the cabin, where Mariah stood watching from the window, holding Rosie close to her chest. The tension between them thickened. "You know," Cyrus said, his voice dripping with malice, "I think we both know exactly where she is." He looked back at Luke, his eyes gleaming with something dark. "And I think you're gonna regret protecting her." The threat hung in the air, as sharp as the biting wind. Luke didn't blink. He knew what had to be done. Rebuilding from the ruins, the standoff was brief. The wind howled again, but this time it wasn't just the cold air that chilled Luke. The danger, the threat, was palpable. Mariah, standing in the doorway, didn't move, her gaze unwavering as she stared down the men outside. It was clear that the showdown wasn't just about them. It was about survival. It was about protecting what they had fought so hard to build. In the end, the men left, but not before Luke made it clear that no one would come near his family again. The fear that had once settled in the cabin began to fade, replaced by something else, a quiet, steadfast resolve. That night, as the storm outside settled into a soft whisper, Luke and Mariah sat side by the fire. Rosie slept soundly between them. There were no words, just the steady crackle of the fire, the warmth in the cabin, and the feeling that, for the first time in a long while, they were safe. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were rebuilding, together. The future awaits spring finally came, a soft green in the soil, a warmth in the air that hadn't been there before. The Marston Ranch, once cold and empty, now bloomed with new life. Luke, Mariah, and Rosie worked the land together, each task a reminder that life could still go on, even after the darkest of winters. As Luke stood at the edge of the pasture, looking over the land they had begun to shape into something more than just a place to survive, he realized something. They weren't just building a home. They were building a future where love, loss, and redemption were all part of the same story. With Mariah by his side and Rosie in their arms, Luke knew that this was just the beginning. They had come through the storm, they had made it, and the future, for the first time in a long while, was full of promise.